Before I get started, don't forget, I have an AMA tonight at 7:30 Mountain Standard Time. If you want to tune in, it's always a good time. Ask questions, bounce ideas back and forth. Normally cover a couple stories, last about an hour or so. If you're around 7:30 Mountain Standard Time, check in. So one of the things I want to talk about is why everything's so distorted, why the government has so much power today. And often people wonder this kind of subconsciously. It's like, seems like they've grown like more tyrannical, and how are they able to do this? One reason, money printer. As I've said many times, if I had to tax people, if I was the US government, if I had to tax people and I had to put war in Afghanistan minus $300 every year for the last 20 years, they would be like, hey, what the heck are we doing over there? Maybe they would ask questions. But that abdicating of responsibility that American people have done for 20, 30 years now is coming to a head. And I've said this before. The reason is we have too much debt as a country. And when we have too much debt, everyone thinks it'll be okay. At least they stick their head in the sand and pretend. But there is a group called the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, bipartisan, that comes out with ideas of how they're going to get through this problem. So if you're wondering what Congress is thinking about, how they're going to get through this debt parade, right? It involves one of two things: massive tax increases, massive spending cuts, and massive inflation. I guess that's three. Okay, that's all miserable stuff, right? So if you are taxing people to pay off debt, so in other words, they don't get anything out of it. You're just paying off debt from previous generations. How well do you think that people will take to that? Probably not well. But at the end of the day, if the pain is worse, if the inflation is worse, sometimes people are like, do it, whatever you have, do whatever you have to do to end this inflation. And a lot of people think, oh, it won't be me. They like me. And a lot of people who think that, by the way, are veterans. I've been in the military, and the veteran community is awesome. But a lot of them think, well, they wouldn't stab us in the back like that. They wouldn't cut our benefits. Yeah, they would. Yeah, they would, unfortunately. And if you haven't realized it already, they don't care about you. They don't care about you personally, right? And your future, right? So when it comes to the aggregate, like what's going on in the economy, we got to cut spending. And some of the things they're suggesting involve veterans. So one of the things I want to talk about is if you're planning on spending 20 years in the military, okay, you're going to have a pension, which is reliant on the full faith and credit of the United States government and their fiscal responsibility. Via probably some kind of disability from your time in the military. Again, full faith and credit of the United States government. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, your TSP or thrift savings plan, which a lot of federal employees put money into, about $1.1 trillion in government debt, aka bonds and treasuries that yield less than inflation, are owned by the DoD. So your savings, your pension, and your disability are reliant on the full faith and credit and trust and fiscal responsibility of the United States government. And I got news for you: they're not fiscally responsible. They're going to cut things. And some of those things might be your pension. And if they don't cut it, they might still pay you the dollars they owe you, and it'll buy you nothing, or it'll buy you half as much. So if you don't believe me, let's take a look at what the CBO's come out with. Options for reducing the deficit. And I will link this in the description. But as I've said many times, um, whatever program you rely on, you don't want to be reliant on the government as much as possible. Okay, because that means you trust that they're fiscally responsible, and they're not. Okay, it's not bad to have a pension, but pensions can go away. So let's take a look. This is from CBO, options to reduce the deficit 2023 to 2032. You may have heard the scuttlebutt online that they're talking about, and these are all just proposals, just ideas that come out from the CBO. Okay, but they got to think about who would a littler population, right? Because Social Security is a big block of voters. So if they were to mess with Social Security, they might not get voted back in. But if they mess with veterans, that's less than 1%. Who cares about them? So let's take a look at what they're options for reducing the deficit for veterans. End VA individual unemployment payments to disabled veterans at full retirement age for Social Security. Yeah, I know your leg got blown off and all that, but and thanks for going over there a couple times. I know we didn't accomplish anything in Iraq. You lost your leg, but now you get Social Security, so suck it up. Okay, so that's one idea. Reduce VA disability benefits for veterans who are older than the full retirement age for Social Security, so you cannot get both benefits. Narrow eligibility for VA disability compensation to exclude veterans with low disability ratings. They also talked about excluding means testing. So if you make a lot of money as a veteran, but your leg got blown off in combat, and part of the social contract of going to fight for your country, when they say, "Hey, go fight this war," you don't really know if it's a just war. You follow orders. That's how the military works. So you followed orders. Your leg got blown off, and then they go, "Thanks for service. Here's some VA disability, but if you're too successful, we're going to have to cut that VA disability because we don't want you to make too much money." Okay, so these are suggestions they're having. The other thing they've talked about is defense spending. Okay, we all know they can reform defense spending. What about compensation for workers? Compensation for the military. In the military, your salary is matched to the average salary increase in the civilian sector. So if that went up 5%, typically the military's goes up 5%. It is not matched to inflation. But what they want to do is, as you can see here, cap increases in basic pay for military service members. You know why they're saying this? It's because inflation's going to soar and they got to keep up with inflation, which means the military is going to cost them more money. Inflation's their own dang fault. And to get out of that problem, right? Inflation is a bad thing for the government unless they can lower their bills as tax receipts come up. But if their bills go up with inflation, it doesn't really help them. So they got to lower those bills. So lower the payments, replace military personnel with civilians, stop building Ford class aircraft carriers. Some of these things I agree with. Here's another one: reduce basic allowance for housing to 80% of average housing costs. I can tell you from personal experience and people um, that I work with, uh, basic allowance for housing is geographically located. So if you're not in the military, basically, if you get moved, you got to go where they send you. So then they have some base housing, but it's usually like 20% of the force. So you go on base and you say, every house around this area is so expensive, especially the last couple of years. So I'm going to go on base. Oh, wait, there's a year wait for base housing. Okay, can't go on base, so I'll look off base. Everything around base is 50% over the basic allowance for housing. So I have to go further off and live in less desirable areas like high crime, the ghetto, and drive an hour into work with high gas prices because basic allowance for housing doesn't cover a house for my family with this insane housing market that we have. So now they want to reduce that even more. I'm telling you, um, if you are reliant on the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, and you're saying, "Hey, I trust these people have my back. They're not going to overspend and have to cut my VA disability and have to cut my pension," and I don't. I'll tell you that much. I don't. So if you're also saving in treasuries, like if you put money in a thrift savings plan or a pension, and you're like, "I think it's getting invested for me," you know where it's getting invested? In more government debt. So your entire circle is reliant. Your entire uh, savings, pension, disability, insurance, everything is reliant on the full faith and credit of the United States government. So, what's my advice to these people? Maybe be a little bit more skeptical. Number one, and number two, don't save. Hedge yourself, because if your pension and your VA disability and your insurance are all backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, what happens if you invest in stocks and treasuries? If the full faith and credit of the United States government goes away, aka your pension, or they cut it, and we're getting into deep recessionary, inflationary territory, what do you think is going to happen to your savings as well? So hedging things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin. That's my take. And a lot of people think it'll never happen to me. It won't be my program that's cut. They really like veterans, yada, yada, yada. It's in the CBO report. They're talking about it right now. And as the pain continues, meaning inflation gets worse, you see what's happening right now. People talk about inflation all the time. They talk about the rent crisis. They talk about the housing crisis. They are pissed. They are very pissed. And as inflation gets worse, people will get more pissed, meaning social unrest. So they will turn to the government and say, do anything to make this stop. That includes cutting spending, your pension, your VA disability. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Don't forget, live AMA tonight, 7:30 Mountain Standard Time. I will see you guys then. Peace.